Hello everybody, my name is Jay Lancaster, or Robin0928, and welcome to Batman vs Superman Rewritten. This has been a project that I've wanted to make for the last 3 years, pretty much since I watched the original Batman vs Superman in theaters. Some people like to think of Batman vs Superman as an underrated masterpiece, Zack Snyder's subversive, introspective reflection on what it is to be a hero. And people like me think of it as an overly dark, terribly written, awfully characterized, kind of garbagely made movie. I'm not insinuating that I'm a better writer than David S. Goyer and the writers of this film. I want that to be clear as we go through the series. This is simply a fun little thought experiment to take a movie from its original concept and try to imagine a revised version of the film that takes the basic elements and makes a new story out of them. So this video is going to be our introduction to what the plan is with the series. Next video is going to be Act 1 of this new story. So let's start with the rules of this rewrite. I didn't want to just completely throw out everything that was made for BVS, because at that point I'm just writing a random Superman sequel. And while I would love to do that, and might or might not have a great idea for a Superman movie, that's not what this series is going to be. So I've anchored myself to writing this new version of Batman vs Superman with 4 rules. Number 1. Batman, Superman, and Lex Luthor are confirmed for this film. We already know from when the film was announced at San Diego Comic-Con that they had already planned on having Batman in a sequel to Man of Steel, so we're not really gonna cut him. And given that the sequel was announced a few weeks after Man of Steel premiered, which does feature multiple Easter eggs for Lex Luthor, it's safe to say that he was planned well in advance to be a prominent figure in this sequel. Number 2. The title fight has to be in the movie. It's called Batman vs Superman. We're getting a Batman vs Superman fight in the movie. Turning back to that announcement, the film was also announced using a quote from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns.
I want you to remember, Clark, in all the years to come, in all your most private moments, I want you to remember my hand at your throat. I want you to remember the one man who beat you.
They were 100% planning on using a Batman and Superman fight, and Dark Knight Returns specifically for this film, so we've got to keep it in our version. 3. Superman must be incapacitated by the end of the film, and 4. Justice League has to be set in motion by this film. We already know that the roadmap for the DCEU was planned out when BVS was being planned, so they knew that this was going to lead into Justice League, and they wanted to use Batman vs Superman as a way to solve the Superman problem, as I've been calling it. That being that Superman is too marketable and important to not be in a Justice League movie, but Superman's also so powerful that you need an in-story explanation as to why Superman alone can't stop the threat that brings the League together. In the New 52, they decided to pull out their biggest gun and have the League fight Darkseid in their first arc. In the DCEU, they did it by having the League form in the middle of their version of the Death and Return of Superman. Even though the fact that the League isn't a thing and only 2 people knew Superman in any capacity, and neither of them really knew him that well, makes the iconography of that story not mean much in the context of this film, but whatever. So our film is going to need to solve the same problem. Find a way to keep Superman out of the conflict of Justice League until he's needed at the end of the film. So now that we've gone through those rules, we already have to make a few cuts before we get through the major plot of the rewrite. We only have 2 major ones that I want to talk about. Number 1. There is no Doomsday. We don't need Doomsday for this movie. We already have enough of a conflict going on in this story that adding to that with Doomsday just seems to waste that story. Also, we're not using Death and Return of Superman as the backbone of a story arc that we're building with this in Justice League. We've only just gotten this Superman on screen, let's not kill him in the second movie he's in. And number 2, no Wonder Woman. I know she was one of the most universally acclaimed parts of Batman vs Superman, even by hacks like me who didn't like the movie. Gal Gadot is amazing, and her solo movie is one of the best DC films that doesn't feature a boy inside of a man's body, But this story is already introducing so much as it is that having another main character that we have to follow just makes this so much more complicated. I went back and forth on whether or not she was in the first meetings for this movie, but decided that most likely she wasn't as early an inclusion as Batman or Luthor, so she was cut. Don't worry though, we are still going to try and set up Patty Jenkins' movie with this, but without having her appear as a major character in this movie. Sound like a decent compromise? So, those are our 4 basic rules. How are we going to apply those rules? How is the story going to make sense? Am I trying not to spoil my silly YouTube show by not going any further with this? All those questions and more will be answered in Batman vs. Superman Rewritten. Oh, and one more thing before we go.
So this is the part of the video that I don't think anybody wants to watch, but I feel like it's important to get it out in this introductory part before we start getting into the minutia of the BVS rewrite. So one of the things when talking about Zack Snyder as a filmmaker, and this film in particular, is talking about art and artist and intention versus execution, and one thing that fans and critics are always guilty of when it comes to this movie is getting bogged down in discussions about Zack Snyder as a person. And that's something I tried to avoid with this. This is a thought experiment. If I was in the room at the moment, what would I have done? And of course, it's also with 3 years of knowing the original film and getting to take stuff from that. So I'm not going to act like I am a better writer than these guys, who are actually like professional screenwriters. This is just my thought experiment and trying to get out something that's been in my head for a long time. And one other thing that I want to do is to say that there are some moments in this series where I might say things about Zack Snyder, and this is not to insinuate that he is a hack or a bad filmmaker, because that could be interpreted like that. The things that I say later on in the series might be interpreted as me accusing Zack Snyder of not being a good filmmaker or being a hack. Zack Snyder is an amazing filmmaker, an amazing visual storyteller. 300 is absolutely incredibly well made. I like a lot of Watchmen. I think it's a really interesting interpretation of that story. So I'm not trying to sit down here and say that Zack Snyder is a bad filmmaker or that he's a hack. He is taking risks with any project he works on. And you can't say that about BVS, that it's not a risky film. It's just not a film that I personally enjoyed. And so this is a way for me to kind of show what I could have done if, you know, or just get my version of it, what I would have loved to see in a Batman vs. Superman movie. But I'm not saying that Zack Snyder's a hack, so I wanted to say that before this gets out there, and people accuse me of, you know, just being a hater and, you know, accusing Zack Snyder of things, because, yeah, I don't want that this series to be interpreted as that. So that's the end of the video. We're going to go to the end card. Thank you guys for watching. Part 1 will be out in a few weeks. See ya.
Hello everybody, my name is Jay Lancaster, and welcome back to Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice Rewritten. In this episode, we're going to be going over the first act of the rewrite. I realized in the last episode of the series that I kind of forgot to add in the minor structural fixes for the rewrite of the movie. These aren't major plot details of the film, like the Doomsday and Wonder Woman cuts, but they are kind of important, in my opinion, to structure this movie. Number 1, I don't think that the shot of with Bruce standing next to a Robin suit should be in the movie. I mean, in general, the shot is actually really cool. It shows how old Bruce has gotten, and it shows that people have abandoned him. That's great, but given that Zack Snyder has said this is supposed to be Dick Grayson's suit and it's referencing death in the family, I don't think we should keep it in. If we are, then just erase the Joker text to it and say that Robin left at some point. I don't think that we need to establish that Batman has a dead Robin in the movie that also introduces Batman. This isn't my personal bias against killing Robin here. I just genuinely think that having a dead Robin without any context is really going to hurt this franchise going forward. We can reference Dick Grayson and Robin in the movie, but not with the context that Robin is dead. I think that maybe having him just leave Bruce to go start the Titans or become Nightwing is better for the story that we're trying to tell. Secondly, I want to establish that Gotham City and Metropolis are not sister cities in this universe. I don't know why this annoyed me so much in the original BVS. They were obviously set up that way so the multiple challenges could happen across Gotham and Metropolis without the audience wondering how the characters got between the two cities. However, I don't think it's a huge problem that needs to be explained in that kind of way. In this version of the movie, I'm going to say that the two cities are about about a 2-hour drive apart. In this analogy, think of Metropolis as New York City, while Gotham City is Atlantic City. For people not in the US, those are two cities, one in New York, one in New Jersey. Kind of how Gotham and Metropolis are in the comics, but it's not really important. Alright, with all that in mind, let's move into our prologue. The original BVS opens with a retelling of the Batman origin, which I don't think we really need. People already know the origin of Batman, so in this we're going to shake it up a little bit. Our film opens with a family walking out of a movie theater. A father, a mother, and a young boy turn into an alleyway, where they are stopped by a mugger who points a gun in the mother's face, getting her pearls caught. A shadow passes over the mugger's face as he looks up to the skies. Suddenly, the Batman leaps down from the rooftops, using a batarang to take them all out. He handcuffs the man in the alley as the family we saw runs off into the night. As police sirens get closer, Batman grapples up to the roof and takes off into the night. The police find the guy tied up with a note from Batman.
So the first half of this prologue is going to be our first introduction to this version of the DCEU Batman. And I think that one of the biggest missed opportunities of Batman vs. Superman is the theme of fallen heroism, but we never get to see the hero before the fall. So we're going to introduce this version of Batman first as a way to kind of parallel what we're going to see later from our Batman. So this version is going to be kind of modeled after the Adam West Batman aesthetically, so classic Batmobile, more gadget-based combat. If possible, a gray and blue suit. I think that would look nicer than the gray and black that we see later. I think that would provide a better contrast. So I think that's kind of where we're steering this Batman towards. Also, I think that visually, if we can make this look like the opening to Batman the Animated Series, I think that'd be pretty cool. I kind of wrote it so that we could do a little bit of a Batman the Animated Series tribute, so that one's for me.
The next morning, Bruce Wayne is on a drive to the Metropolis branch of Wayne Enterprises, reading the newspaper reports about blackouts across the city. We realize that we are watching Bruce Wayne's perspective of the events of Man of Steel, and as Bruce steps out of the car, we can see the final battle between Superman and General Zod going on in the distance. As the two aliens crash into the building, it comes falling down. People are running away from the carnage as Bruce runs into the clouds of smoke and debris. He grabs and protects the little girl as the battle ends and the smoke clears. After the battle, Superman flies down into the wreckage of the city, people applauding and thanking him for his actions. The little girl Bruce saved runs up to hug Superman as Bruce slowly turns away. End prologue, title sequence.
I think that this and the first half of the prologue kind of shows both sides of Batman, as well as introducing our conflict for this movie and why it makes sense. So in the original Batman vs. Superman, we just get the second half of the prologue where Bruce runs into the battle of Metropolis. I think that should be in there, and I think that does provide the catalyst to where we see our hero go later. But I think that the first half is important to show the origin and where we're starting from before that catalyst. We also want to show Superman in this intro, not with them interacting, but with just a casual look at how people treated Superman after the Battle of Metropolis. We want to show Superman kind of getting worshipped like a god, and it's kind of an awkward situation, but we're kind of setting that dynamic up between the two of them, and I think the prologue is a good chance to show that. So even after all this chaos and destruction that Superman, eventually is going to be blamed for by Batman, we want to show people still treating Superman as if he's some great hero, and I think that's a good way to do it in this prologue.
So let's move on to the proper story of this film. It's been about 2 years since Superman fought Zod and established himself as a hero. We meet up with Lois Lane in Nigeria, covering a story about the local warlord for the Daily Planet. She's taken hostage with her photographer, who is an undercover CIA agent and is not named Jimmy Olsen. Superman swoops in to rescue her and incapacitates the warlord. Back in the US, this action is met with controversy as they are reported dead with no visible sign of death. We aren't using the magic bullet angle from the original film. Superman is lambasted in the press, and people are calling on the government to step in and hold Superman accountable for his action. The person leading the civilian charge against Superman is Alexander Luthor Jr. Superman publicly accepts the government's summons to Congress, and Luthor announces a party at his mansion to celebrate. Press and public figures are invited to this party, including both Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent, who is invited to cover the story for the Planet. Clark wants to cover the Batman story developing in Gotham, however, Perry White refuses, saying that the cost of sending Clark back and forth from Gotham to Metropolis would probably bankrupt the paper. Clark wants to investigate Batman as a series of criminals have been murdered in Gotham prisons, all with bat symbols branded onto their chests. In Gotham, Alfred confronts Bruce about this direction that Batman is taking, but Bruce defends himself, saying that he's not responsible, and he is not a murderer. At the party, Bruce runs into Clark, and the two of them have a conversation discussing the methods of Batman and Superman. In this case, we're gonna play up the age difference between Bruce and Clark, individual liberty versus safety and all that stuff. Alexander Luthor Jr. breaks up the conversation, introducing himself to Bruce and Clark. Bruce acts really chummy with Luthor, talking about how he's friends with his late father, and Luthor talks about buying out Wayne Enterprises. Like that conversation from Arkham Knight that's an Easter egg. it's a little bit of a funny moment that we can play.
So taking a second away from the story again, I think that Clark looking into Batman's abuses of civil liberties is a great subplot for Clark in this movie. It's a great, kind of very Superman thing to care about how Batman's treating criminals in Gotham versus Metropolis. I think that is a great angle for Superman to go with. I think we should keep with this angle. We're going to keep developing it over the course of BVS Rewritten. I also think that we should play up kind of an age difference. I'm stealing this from Movie Bob in this case, where he talks about how they really don't reference the fact that Clark is like 10, 15 years younger than Bruce, so we could totally have a kind of Gen X Batman versus millennial Superman. I think that's really interesting.
And it's now part of the story where we have to talk about Lex Luthor in this rewrite. Honestly, I think we should keep Jesse Eisenberg as Luthor. He was an interesting interpretation of Luthor, and I think that we can play up how this version of Luthor kind of acts different compared to other interpretations. He's kind of this post-crisis regular billionaire Luthor mixed with Jesse Eisenberg's performance in The Social Network, so we aren't really going to recast him. Instead, we're going to give him a little bit more of a backstory that's tied into Superman. So let's get into Lex Luthor's speech. Luthor's giving a speech to the party guests, talking a lot about Superman's role on Earth, talking about gods and man. During the speech, Bruce slips off to a side hallway, plugging a drive into the server. At a point during the speech, he gets choked up talking about his father. He starts stammering and eventually stops. Bruce steps up to the stage, finishing Luthor's thought that man has to take back their planet before it's too late. Luthor thanks Bruce. As Clark walks away from the party, Bruce grabs a drive before leaving himself. Alright, now time for the scene I hate the most in the original movie. The original hearing scene is a chance to have Superman profess why he does what he does. It's something that we never see in this universe, or really any Superman media, because Superman has always just been a stoic character to these writers. So we're finally going to let Superman have a dedicated scene to talk about why he loves this planet, and that he's dedicated to protecting it. And in the original movie, it has Lex Luthor leaving an actual jar of piss on a senator's desk and a building exploding. So let's make a big change to the scene. At the hearing, Superman discusses his reasons for doing what he does, that some problems are too great for humanity, and if someone has abilities like his, they owe it to humanity to help people. Think something between the Ghostbusters 2 speech and the scene between Peter Parker and Tony Stark in Civil War. During the speech, time slows to a crawl as Clark hears something ticking. He snaps into action, getting as many people out of the building as he can. The building starts crumbling around him, and with Superman flying out of the fire. While Superman is initially celebrated for his action, the chairman of the committee, Senator Finch, who we established earlier in Act 1 as the Superman opponent, died in the hospital due to Superman's inability to get her there out fast enough. Clark blames himself for this, and media pressure gets back on to Superman. In the end, the worst part of the Senate scene is that despite Superman recognizing a crisis, he doesn't do anything to help save the people in the Senate building. This shot of Superman standing in the fire as people burn around him drives me insane. From the first moment I saw the film opening weekend to editing this video, I hate this sequence so much. It's in moments like this that I question if Zack Snyder likes Superman in the first place. Does he actually like this character? Because this isn't Superman. I don't usually subscribe to this adaptation changes elements of the character, therefore it is wrong and the creators of this version are wrong. But in this case, I genuinely don't know of any version of Superman who would do this. The Superman in Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice isn't Superman. He's Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen. He doesn't care about humanity, doesn't want to save people. He is just an alien who does not understand the human. And that is not what Superman should stand for as a character. I said in part 0 that I hold no ill will towards the writers and creators of the movie, so let's end this little rant and get back to my version of this. During all of the chaos, LexCorp puts in a bid for Zod's ship from under Bruce Wayne. Bruce, however, is expecting a delivery of kryptonite that crashed during the Battle of Metropolis. He wants it for Batman-related things, but he knows that the disappearance of such a rare mineral would not go unnoticed, so he knows that Batman has to steal it. Alfred wants Bruce to think about his actions, but Bruce is kind of set in his new method of thinking. Bruce chases down the shipment of kryptonite in a brand new Batmobile, a massive tank-like structure, painted all black with a massive cannon on top. The cannon shoots the tires out of the truck as Batman swoops in, stealing the kryptonite. Batman stops the truck from falling into the harbor and drives away, without killing anyone. Original Batman vs. Superman. While on his way back out to the Batcave, Superman drops down on the road that Bruce is driving on. Batman hits Superman, bouncing his tank off of the Man of Steel. Superman pulls Batman out of the car, asking what he's planning. Batman almost smirks and say, "Wouldn't you like to know, Clark Kent?" Superman pauses, saying, "Fine, Bruce." We establish that the two of them understand they know the other's identity and escalate the tension. Here is the bit where we have the "do you bleed" scene, just expanded a little bit. Bruce asks Clark if he knows how many people died in Wayne Tower when he slammed Zod into it carelessly. Clark asks Bruce if he really cared about all those lives, or did he just care about the loss of profit from the destruction. Clark flies away, warning Bruce that he wouldn't want to mess with him on a bad day. Bruce looks up at the sky and says, "You could say the same about me." Yeah, a bit of a cheesy line, but I don't know how to write a scene better. In the original Batman vs. Superman and in the extended cut, Lois Lane is mostly used in a subplot to investigate Luthor and his company. Her whole arc is centered around the not magic bullets that give the appearance that Superman was the one to kill the Nigerian warlord, but that entire arc is kinda stupid considering that it's made clear that Superman didn't kill the warlords and that he doesn't use bullets, and in the end the storyline just comes off really dumb. So in our version of the events, Lois is going to look into the deaths of the gang that kidnapped her and try to clear Superman's name. We catch up with that story with Lois Lane. Lois's investigation into the incident in Nigeria leads her to LexCorp. Lois's investigation into the incident in Nigeria leads her back to LexCorp, where she interviews Luthor under the pretense of the Superman hearing. We see in a flashback that Alexander Luthor Sr., who's going to look a lot more like the traditional Lex Luthor, was sick and on life support during Zod's invasion. During the battle, Superman slams into the hospital, taking out the emergency generator and killing his father. Lex is sent into a depressive spiral. He knows that the experience he had that day was not the only one in Metropolis like his, so he swore that he would see Superman brought to justice for the pain and suffering of everyone like him on that day. We can reveal this during the interview, but I think it would be cool to do it during flashback.
So one of the things that I think is interesting about the original Batman vs. Superman is how much everybody kind of hated Lex Luthor and Jesse Eisenberg specifically. It was one of the first major complaints outside of stuff like Martha and yeah, that was it. Basically, Martha and Lex Luthor were the first two major complaints coming out of Batman vs. Superman. And I'm kind of in the minority here where I think that Lex Luthor was one of the best parts of Batman vs. Superman conceptually. I think that he could be really interesting if we give him some more time in the spotlight. So this version of Lex Luthor doesn't have to compete with being introduced alongside characters like Wonder Woman and Doomsday. We can just focus on Lex Luthor as our main antagonist for the film. So we're not really going to have to explain why his personality is the way it is because, well, we don't need to do that. You know, atypical personalities don't have to be explained, but we are going to explain why he has this kind of disdained relationship to Superman. We get kind of hints of it and what his moral philosophy on it, but I want to make this as personal as possible for Lex Luthor. So we're going to take something that was actually introduced in the original Batman vs. Superman and give it a little bit of a spin to try and articulate this character's motivations a little bit more. So let's get back into the movie.
Lois finally starts to ask about the Nigeria incident, and Lex snaps, turning on Lois and screaming about the true nature of God and man, with Lois running out of the interview. At this time, Clark is finally given permission to investigate Batman's antics in Gotham following the Kryptonite robbery. Clark starts talking to various people in the city and in the prison system. They tell Clark that while Batman was always someone to fear, he was kind of like a cop in a way. He worked with the police a lot, even used to have this kid that ran around and helped him clean the streets. After Metropolis, Batman had started to get a lot darker, more sinister, willing to bend the law to get the results he wanted to. We cut to Bruce, now processing the kryptonite and a sample of Clark's DNA he swiped from the party. Using the sample, he learns more about Kryptonian physiology, how Superman is weak to the mineral. On the drive he stole from Luthor, he starts reading other theories Luthor started writing about Kryptonian biology, stating that if Superman's powers come from yellow sun radiation, that other types of radiation might weaken him. The drive also contains data about the metahuman theory that LexCorp and the government have been looking into since the appearance of Superman, but the files are encrypted. Batman begins to start developing weapons and a new bat armor to help him kill Superman. On Zod's ship, we see Luthor experimenting with the Kryptonian technology, building something. We start this big montage. Luthor building his new weapons, Bruce starts developing his new bat armor and kryptonite gas and staff, and Clark saving people on a grand scale, while civilians turn against the Man of Steel. We see people with signs saying, "Superman, go home, take back our planet," you know, fairly typical Westboro Baptist stuff.
Yeah, this point right here is the midpoint of the movie where, you know, the tension is building and building and building for these characters. And we want to use this montage as kind of a way to let Zack Snyder play a little bit. We know he loves these grand sweeping shots of, you know, action and trying to show how big a situation is, you know, giant crowd shots, huge moment. So stuff like Superman with a rocket and at Day of the Dead, these would be moments that I think we should put here. The Batman training montage that we get in the movie could be put here, and I think we should use some new stuff with Luthor experimenting with the Kryptonian technology and building stuff, set up what Lex Luthor is working on, because, you know, we never see any of that. We see some of it in the extended cut, but not really that much of it. So we're going to use this montage to kind of build our tension and build these characters and build this conflict that's coming in our, at the end of Act 2 into Act 3. I think that's what we want to use this montage to do. So one of the weirder things about Batman vs. Superman is that it's a sequel to Man of Steel, but it's also a Batman origin movie, and it's an origin movie to Wonder Woman and Lex Luthor, and it's Death of Superman, and it's the lead into Justice League. There's a lot of... This movie has to be a lot of things, and the thing that it has to sacrifice in order to be more things, you know, you can't be all of these things at once. So what it gives up in order to be that Batman film, that Lex Luthor film, that Death of Superman movie, that lead into Justice League, it gives up being a Superman movie. It gives up being a sequel to Man of Steel, pretty much. So Superman's pretty absent in his own sequel, which blows. You know, Superman has pretty much no dialogue in this movie, in the theatrical cut, and he gets a little bit more in the extended cut, but not that much. And I think that kind of blows. You know, I really love Superman, and this is his sequel, and, you know, in the original version, this is the movie where he dies, and we barely get any time to spend with him. We're not killing him in this version of the movie, but we should spend some more time with Superman. This is still his movie. This is just as much his movie as it is Batman's and Lex Luthor's movie. So this next scene we're going to pitch is going to pretty much explain that. And we're going to take an element of a scene in the original movie, one of the scenes that I actually love, and we're going to give it a little bit more to it and give it a little twist to it. So we're going to go to the Jonathan Kent Mountain scene.
Clark goes back to Smallville and visits Martha Kent. The two discuss everything going on in Clark's life. He's confused about what his purpose is. Should Clark be Superman if Earth rejects him? He goes to his father's grave and sits there, contemplating what he has to do. A vision of Jonathan Kent appears in front of him, telling Clark that he needs to do what he thinks is right. Jonathan tells Clark that he was wrong when he was alive, that Clark has abilities, and it wasn't Jonathan's decision to say what he should or shouldn't do with them. If he wants to help, that's his prerogative. But if he can't handle what he's gone through, it's his decision as well. He can be the hero, or he can be a normal man. It's his choice, not Jonathan's, not Krypton's, Clark's. As Clark prepares to leave, we get a small scene of Martha Kent offering to feed Clark. Just use the scene from All-Star Superman. It'd be really cute. Actually, yay! We're playing the scene. Clark flies off, and as Martha Kent returns to the house, she's cornered by a squad of masked men. Clark returns to Metropolis, where he sees a note on his door from Luthor, telling him to meet at the top of Lex Tower. There, Luthor explains that he knows both his and Batman's secret identities. Clark assumes that he paid Bruce off to target Superman, but Luthor admits that he never had to do anything to get Batman to want to kill Clark. That was just a happy little accident. In the distance, the bat symbol turns on, for the first time in Metropolis. Remember how we didn't want to have Gotham and Metropolis as sister cities? This is honestly the reason why. I want this moment of seeing the bat symbol towering over Metropolis, this massive bat overtaking the pristine skyline of the city. Batman is marking his territory. Luthor exposits that he has kidnapped Martha Kent and will kill her unless he confronts Batman, shooing him off. Clark flies over to where Bruce is, a part of the city still undeveloped in the aftermath of the Battle of Metropolis. Clark lands in front of Bruce, saying that they are being manipulated. As Superman approaches, he is hit by a massive blast of kryptonite gas, as Batman throws out a smoke grenade. As Clark blows the fog away with the gust of super breath, which we've actually never seen in a modern Superman film, so I don't know, I think it'd be cool to see. Bruce grapbles up into the shadows. We see from Superman's perspective that his supervision is getting weaker and weaker, and that he cannot see Batman hiding in between the abandoned structures. He throws exploding batarangs that blow up in Clark's hand. Superman turns and fires his laser eyes straight into the building as Batman grapples away out of sight. From the shadows, Batman taunts the Man of Steel, saying that he pretends to be a god, he pretends to be a man, but he is neither. Superman uses his weakened powers to counter Batman's gadgets and Batmobile. At some point during the fight, Superman is distracted and is hit with flying Batman, now in his mech suit. Superman is brought to the ground as Batman pulls out a kryptonite spear, cutting his face as a trail of blood goes down his cheek. Bruce stands over Clark, spear pointed at his chest, getting tangled in Superman's cape. Clark exclaims, "You're going to kill her. My mom, you're going to kill..."
Hey folks, viewer mail time again. Oh, here's one from Sally, age 14. Dear Pig, aren't you interrupting the story at the most suspenseful part? Well, the answer is yes, Sally. Yes, I am. Keep those cards and letters coming.
So we're going to take a little break here in the middle of this climactic moment to talk about Yeah, you might be wondering why I'm leaving Martha in. Martha is the most controversial scene in one of the most polarizing comic book films of the decade. People immediately were like, this is the worst, this sucks, this scene is terrible. I told friends that I was working on this, and the only thing they told me is, oh, so you're cutting Martha. And I'm keeping it. It's the one thing I knew I wanted to keep from the original Batman vs. Superman while I was coming up with the concept of this. I wanted Martha to still be in the movie. Martha in concept is the big Batman moment. This could be an iconic Batman moment, up there with Mask of the Phantasm and the grave scene, which we just referenced a little bit earlier. Kind of, I realized as I was writing it, I was just writing the Mask of the Phantasm scene, but with ghosts. But this scene could be the iconic moment from this movie. It could be a new Batman visual, you know, something that people draw on for later Batman stories, the fall of Batman. You know, we get to see the little boy who had his parents shot in the alley become the man with the gun. And I think that's such a great conceptual moment, and I think that we can capture that with Martha. It's just everything around Martha makes this scene so dumb. You know, this should be a quiet, beautiful moment of Bruce realizing his own flaws and looking inward and seeing what he has become. And the scene contains Ben Affleck screaming, "Martha, why did you say that name?" And Lois Lane running in randomly. You know, she's barely in the rest of the movie, and she only exists in this so that Superman has to be the one to get exposed to kryptonite and eventually die. And we hate that. We're not going to do that in this movie. Lois Lane is not a part of the final battle. I don't think it works. And Batman has this just clunky looking bat suit that would be an amazing cosplay, but in the film is so dumb because they portray this abomination of Batman as being the final evolution. And we're showing this Batman as being ineffectual, you know, he's slow, it's hard to punch, because that's what this Batman is. This is the perversion of Batman. We get the true Batman in Act 3, but this Batman at the end of Act 2, the metal robot Batman, is the worst Batman. So we see the really good Batman before the Battle of Metropolis, we see a really good Batman after the Martha scene, and then the Batman and Superman fight, we see the worst version of Batman, this slow, ineffectual, hate-driven monster. And that's what Martha can be. The Martha scene can be the height of this tension between these two characters. And this is going to be a silent moment afterwards. When Superman says Martha, we hear nothing. We just see this moment of Batman holding this kryptonite spear the same way that the guy held the gun to his mother. And I think that is our moment of greatest tension. So let's cut back to Martha.
You're going to kill Martha. Bruce steps backwards, looking at his arm, holding the weapon in the same position that the mugger that killed his mother was in. A flash of a gun tangled in pearls as Bruce throws the spear into the nearby harbor, not into a puddle for Lois to get trapped under later. He drops to his knees, tearing the metallic helmet off, revealing the face of a broken man, someone confronted with his own demons. Clark stumbles to his feet, explaining that Luthor is holding his mother hostage. He doesn't know where. Bruce stands up, putting a newer cloth mask back on. Bruce explains that LexCorp was buying up property in the Destruction Zone, something that we established in the first act of the movie that I totally blanked on when writing the script for these. So one of them should be where he's holding Martha. Clark and Bruce split up, ready to go and stop Luthor together. Bruce looks at Clark and says, "Don't worry, Martha is not going to die tonight." Bruce flies over to a nearby warehouse, jumping into a room full of guys, beating them all up while using multiple gadgets, before grabbing Martha from a back room.
So you notice this might read like a scene from the original Batman vs. Superman. It's pretty much the most beloved scene from that movie, where we see Batman at the warehouse. The warehouse fight is probably the most liked scene in the whole movie. I think it's the one that people really are responded to, even when the movie was new. And it does work. The action is on point. Everything is really done well in that scene. The problem with the warehouse scene is mostly contextual. So in the film, it's supposed to show Batman returning, this grand triumphant return of the hero after going to his darkest point during the Batman and Superman fight. And that's great, but we've never seen what this Batman is like before the Battle of Metropolis, before the darkening that he goes throughout this movie. So this kind of feels very hollow, which is why we put in the prequel scene, the prologue, at the beginning of the movie to show what Batman is like before the Battle of Metropolis. And then for this grand triumphant hero moment, Batman's still killing a bunch of dudes, and at the end of the scene, he blows up the warehouse to make sure that, even if he didn't kill it, everybody in the warehouse is dead, except for him and Martha. So that's not really a triumphant hero moment if Bruce is still going around just murdering goons willy-nilly. So I think in this version, we want to make sure that this is more gadget-oriented, he's fighting with gadgets instead of brute strength, throwing crates at dudes' heads. Like, if you take a look at that shot where the crate goes hurtling at this guy's head and just smashes him against the wall, if you tell me that wasn't a dead man, I don't know what to tell you. Like, this is definitely Batman just murdering a bunch of dudes in a warehouse. So this version of events, hopefully, is going to make it a little bit less murder Batman and a little bit more triumphant hero, seeing what he was like, remember, during the prologue scene that we had at the beginning of the movie. So that's what this is intentionally doing.
Now, let's add a little bit to the ending of this scene. After Batman grabs Martha Kent and grapples away, and we get this amazing line.
It's okay. I'm a friend of your son's.
I figured. The cape?
Seriously, it's probably the funniest line in the entire DC extended universe, except for Shazam. We see a group of police officers approach the burning building, seeing a group of thugs tied up, Martha Kent standing by. There's a note attached to them, saying, "Kidnapping, assault, breaking and entering, battery, all on Luthor's payroll, signed Batman." Yeah, I know it's a little cheesy and more of a Spider-Man move than a traditional Batman kind of thing, but I think it brings a little bit of levity to the moment and shows a lighter side of Batman, and I kind of think it works for this moment. Anyway, back to the plot. Clark meets up with Bruce outside of Zod's ship at LexCorp. The two walk slowly through the ship, searching for Luthor. In the background, we can see references to Darkseid, Steppenwolf, all that cool new god stuff that they want to use in future movies. They find Luthor, now in a Kryptonian mech suit, a blend of the Man of Steel Kryptonian armor and Luthor's comic mech. Batman and Superman are thrown out of the ship, crashing into LexCorp's offices and getting absolutely destroyed by Luthor. Clark flies in front of Luthor's fist to stop a direct hit towards Bruce. Bruce uses some kind of gadget to incapacitate an arm that's about to hit Clark. They kind of take turns saving each other in the final fight, disabling weapons that Luthor pulls out in order to kill Batman and Superman. Finally, Luthor reveals his final weapon, a red sun generator. He starts building a small red sun that could destroy the entirety of Metropolis. Superman rushes in, grabbing the red sun, disconnecting it from the generator, holding it in his hands while Batman pulls Lex from the suit. The small sun explodes in Superman's hand, creating a giant flash of light. When the dust settles, the sun is reduced to ash as Superman weakly flies over to Batman, who is putting Luthor in handcuffs. He slowly drops to the ground, almost collapsing. Luthor laughs hysterically at this, as Batman asks what Luthor did to Clark. Luthor explains that Kryptonians have a natural weakness to red sun energy, and that prolonged exposure to the energy can take away Kryptonians' powers. Superman struggles to his feet as Batman hits Luthor until he passes out. Batman and Superman are victorious. Batman tells Superman that he's more than just his abilities, that Superman isn't a god. He's a man genuinely trying to help. Clark turns to Batman, thanking him for saving him. The two share a handshake as the sun rises in the background.
So if you can remember all the way back to part 0 of this series, we talked about what I call the Superman problem, which is that you want a Justice League movie. The Justice League, in this point, now kind of has to explain everything because that's kind of the current trend of writing, but that's something to get into in another video. You want to explain why the Justice League needs to exist if every problem can be solved by a Superman. So Superman can't be a member of the Justice League at the beginning, or the threat has to be so big it has to be more than Superman. But you also want Superman in your movie because he's marketable, and Superman is one of the most marketable superheroes, even if Batman's kind of a little bit more popular than Superman in terms of toy sales. So this is my solution to getting Superman out of the conflict of Justice League. So if they were going to do the Steppenwolf conflict, or any real major conflict, Superman doesn't have to be there, but we don't kill Superman in this movie. We're depowering him, taking him out of the conflict of the next movie, but not doing Death and Return of Superman, because I think it's a little bit too early in this Superman's history to be really considering doing Death and Return of Superman. It just felt like Man of Steel happened, and then Batman vs. Superman, the original, and then Superman was dead. Like, that hadn't been earned. That death didn't impact everybody as much as a character like Superman dying should affect somebody. Like, we'd only known this Superman for 2 movies, and he barely had any screen time in this movie. So if we're going to do Death and Return of Superman at some point, which I don't even know if we should do, that should be in his own movie, you know, with the whole focus of the movie being about Superman. So his death gets the maximum impact. So in this, we are going to take Superman out of the conflict of Justice League without killing him, so Clark Kent will still be around, but Superman will not be a factor into the action of Justice League.
Yes, I know that in comics, Red Sun radiation isn't used exactly like this. It's mostly seen as a temporary depowering for a Kryptonian or a death sentence, but I think this is a decent way to work it into the movies. Also, it's a weakness of Superman's that's almost never used in movies or TV shows, but it was established in Man of Steel, with Krypton having a red sun and Zod slowly gaining abilities that Superman has when exposed to yellow sunlight. They set it up in the first movie, so let's pay it off in the sequel. So, with the main conflict of the film over, let's wrap this whole story up in the epilogue. We first see a scene of Lex Luthor imprisoned, being shaved bald and put in a prison cell. You know, like the original BVS. Like in the original, Batman appears out of the darkness. Luthor explains that he knew the Red Sun wouldn't kill Superman. No, he would survive that. He was just getting the world ready for a great something that is coming to Earth. He says, and believe me, they weren't going to be stopped by the likes of Superman. Yeah, we are setting up the new God stuff for Justice League here. We catch up with the Daily Planet, Perry White reading the newspaper with the headline, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, written by Lois Lane and Clark Kent.
Oh man, that sounds like the title of this video. Isn't that really neat how I planned it out like that?
We catch up with Clark taking a trip to Gotham via train. Our color palette is gray and the weather rainy. Clark ends up at the Batcave with Bruce. They both discuss what the plan is going to be moving forward. Superman's alibi is having left Earth after Luthor's arrest, and the threat that Luthor just gave Bruce that something is coming for Earth, who just lost its only superpowered defender. Bruce says that isn't true, as there are others on Earth. He pulls up the data he stole from Luthor at the party, profiling 4 other possible metahumans: a speedster, a teenager augmented with a piece of alien technology, a man breathing underwater who took out a submarine with some kind of quindent, and a woman who looks awfully similar to a woman who fought in World War I. He says that Luthor was monitoring these people for a reason, and if they have a chance to stop whatever's coming for Earth, then the 2 of them need to get them all together. They're going to need a team. They're going to need a league. Smash cut to black. So that's the end of the movie, but of course the audience is kind of conditioned to stay for the entire credits for the possibility of seeing some kind of tease for whatever sequel the studio has planned. So for this lead-in film, we should have some kind of teaser for whatever's coming next. 3 years later, I'm still so confused as to why there was no post-credit scene in Batman vs. Superman, so we are going to do one for this rewrite, and it goes a little something like this. We see Bruce standing alone in the cave, looking at the details of Luthor's files, at the photo of Wonder Woman in World War I. He tells Alfred he's confused as to how this woman could possibly be alive still. Alfred leaves, and as Bruce turns back to the computer, his arm is tied up and pulled behind his back. We hear footsteps approach Bruce, asking how he got that photo. Before Bruce can say anything, the lasso glows a bright gold, illuminating the shadows and revealing Diana Prince, Wonder Woman, stepping out of the shadows and into the light, before we slam to a title card. Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman will return in Justice League, or to be continued in Wonder Woman.
Either of these options I feel like works for the DC Extended Universe. I think that Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman will return in Justice League. It's kind of a more Marvel thing to do with it, where it's X character will return in the Avengers. So it's not really... it's a very Marvel thing to do with the end credits tag. So I think that to be continued in Wonder Woman kind of sets up more that this is an ongoing story that you'll have to watch each individual part of. It's not really something to skip. I don't think that in the grand scheme of the DC Extended Universe, we don't learn that much about Wonder Woman that we can't imply in Batman vs. Superman, but I think that in keeping her backstory and who she is secret for the entirety of BVS, like we don't know that the woman in the photo in 1917 is actually Wonder Woman until we get to this point. I guess we can imply it, but we don't see her show up until this end credits scene, we now are more motivated to go and look at what Wonder Woman is and who she is and her backstory, because we haven't gotten even a taste of what her character is like until Wonder Woman. So that kind of makes it more of a continuing saga versus setting up the big Justice League movie, but either end credits tag is fine. And so, that is the end of Batman vs. Superman Rewritten. I honestly did not think that this project would ever end, but I'm so happy that you have all stuck around and watched to the end of the series. So, last minute things before we wrap this up. I don't want to make a part 4 where I talk about the future of the DCEU after BVS, but a few of you kind of wanted me to talk about where DC should go after my version of BVS Rewritten, or for me to write the entire DCEU all over again, but that's too much of a wish fulfillment for me. So here is the basic rundown. I think that Justice League should be incredibly simple, just a bring the team together kind of story. After that, we do a few more solo movies, definitely get another Superman movie in there at some point. You know, your obvious Batman movie, Shazam, introduce some new characters, flesh out the ones we established in Justice League and in Batman vs. Superman. After that point, sky's the limit. You have New Gods stuff to do. That's one of the reasons I set up New Gods for BVS Rewritten, you know, setting up the Darkseid stuff, because I feel like that's something that they really want to do. Really take any Justice League movie or Justice League story. There's some great ones. Tower of Babel is one that would be amazing for a Justice League movie. A murder mystery with a mystery with the Justice League sounds fun. You know, go nuts with that. I think the Justice League has the chance to do that. You want to go to alternate universes, DC is more suited to that than Marvel really is. So, you know, you could do Crime Syndicate versus Justice League. But that's not really what this is for. I just really wanted to take a look at this specific movie. It's one of the reasons I also didn't really want to do Aquaman Rewritten, because, you know, there's not as many angles that I could really do with this. So that was what BVS really wanted to be. BVS Rewritten was kind of just my chance to take this pinnacle linchpin of the DCEU and try to maybe correct some things and set the DCEU on a path to where it can be as successful as it probably should be. So thank you everybody for sticking around. Of course, the series is inspired by both Movie Bob's Really That Bad series about Batman vs. Superman, which I absolutely recommend. He goes into way more detail about some of my thoughts on the movie and about a lot of reasons why personally I don't like it. Like, it elaborates it in more words than I can manage. It's very long, but it's very worth the analysis. As well as, of course, the Nando V movies, Man of Steel and Justice League Rewritten series that he did a few years ago. Those are both incredible watches. His Justice League especially is very, very good. It's a great movie. Now, it's of course going to differ a lot from mine because he's starting from the endpoint of the original Batman vs. Superman, whereas if I was going to do Justice League Rewritten, well, I'd kind of have to start from where Batman vs. Superman Rewritten. So maybe I'll get around to a Justice League Rewritten at some point. I'd stay tuned for that. Anyway, my name is Robin0928, aka Jay Lancaster. This has been Batman vs. Superman Rewritten, and hopefully this is going out on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve, so have a happy holidays. I will see you all in the new year. Thanks for watching. Whoa, that was a long video.